He thought she was just another face in the Monroe County Courthouse hallway. Officer Vance Harland, driven by his badge, wounded pride, and deep-seated bias, strode forward with a sense of unearned authority. In a moment of cruel arrogance, he kicked her shin, laughing to himself, unaware that the woman on the floor taking meticulous notes wasn't a bystander. She was Laurel Sinclair, soon to be the Oakidge Police Department's new chief. The courthouse air was thick with humidity, mingling the scent of floor wax, stale coffee, and anxious anticipation. Harland loved the courthouse for its crowds, which he treated as props to showcase his dominance. Today, after testifying in a minor case using questionable tactics, he moved through the crowded hallway, pushing past families, lawyers, and defendants. Sitting calmly on a bench was Laurel, sharply dressed in a beige trench coat over a navy turtleneck. Fully absorbed in reviewing the department's operational budget, rife with discrepancies and unaccounted expenses. "Move it," he barked, looming over her. Laurel, unflinching, replied, "My feet aren't in the aisle. There's room for you to pass." Anger flared in Harland. Her quiet defiance threatened his fragile ego. He delivered a hard kick to her shin, scattering her portfolio across the floor. Papers detailing internal audits, civil rights complaints, and overtime fraud slid chaotically. Nearby witnesses gasped but did not intervene. Harland's reputation as a dangerous officer ensured silence. Laurel lowered herself to the floor, gathering the documents with deliberate care. She looked up at him and asked calmly, "Your name and badge number?" Harland supplied them, smug and unafraid, confident no one would challenge him. After leaving the courthouse, Laurel immediately contacted Mayor Fairfax, informing him of her arrival and hinting at imminent reform. Meanwhile, in the Oakidge Police Department, Harland bragged to his fellow officers about the incident, mistaking fear for respect. They laughed nervously, sensing his aggressive display. A brief announcement over the intercom summoned all personnel to the main assembly room for the introduction of the new chief. Harland muttered under his breath, anticipating an inconvenient speech from an outsider. Mayor Douglas Fairfax addressed the department, emphasizing the need for integrity and introducing the new chief, Laurel Sinclair. The room fell silent as Laurel entered, her uniform immaculate, stars gleaming on her collar, a commanding presence. Harland froze as he recognized her, the same woman whose shin he had assaulted. Her gaze locked onto his, stripping him of his bravado. She spoke clearly and authoritatively. "As of this moment, everything you thought you knew about this department ends." Harland's confidence crumbled. The woman he underestimated now held absolute authority over him. Laurel's calm, deliberate demeanor signaled the start of a reckoning that would change Oakidge forever. Justice was no longer abstract. It had arrived in the form of a woman who refused to be intimidated. The Oakidge Police Department's central precinct was a fortress of concrete and steel, buzzing with the energy of officers changing shifts. Harland lounged in the locker room, recounting his courthouse conquest to the younger officers, proud of his intimidation tactics. Rookie Sawyer Quinn listened uneasily, knowing the officer's behavior teetered on the edge of criminal. Harland's arrogance filled the room, dismissing concerns about complaints or union repercussions. Suddenly, the intercom announced the mayor's briefing introducing the new chief. Officers groaned, expecting a tedious lecture. Harland adjusted his uniform, smirking, assuming this outsider would pose no real threat. The mayor, Douglas Fairfax, emphasized a fresh start, calling for integrity and accountability. Laurel Sinclair entered, her presence commanding attention. The hall fell silent. Her eyes scanned the room, locking on Harland with a penetrating stare that froze him mid-step. She didn't raise her voice, but the authority radiating from her sent an unmistakable message. The era of unchecked power was over. Harland realized with a cold jolt that the woman he assaulted in the courthouse was now the ultimate arbiter of his fate. For the first time, he felt fear. Laurel addressed the officers, declaring her intention to restructure the department and enforce strict accountability. Harland's usual arrogance evaporated, leaving only a gnawing dread. He was confronted with the consequences of his actions, and the realization that his career, his influence, and his untouchable image were about to crumble. The shift from intimidation to justice had begun, and the employees of Oakidge would soon witness the transformation of a culture long tolerated in silence. Meanwhile, Laurel quietly noted which officers had thrived under misconduct and which had been complicit. Her gaze swept past the rookies, the lieutenants, and finally landed back on Harland. The message was clear: corruption would no longer be tolerated, and the complacent would answer for their complicity. Harland's mind raced. This was a new game, and he had no idea how to play it. The courthouse incident was not just a personal affront. It was the spark that ignited a sweeping reform that would leave no corrupt officer untouched. As Laurel stepped down from the podium, a subtle, tense anticipation hung in the air. Every officer present understood, in that quiet, loaded moment, that Oakidge would never be the same. Justice had found its champion, and power was about to be recalibrated. Inside her new office, on the top floor of Oakidge PD, Chief Laurel Sinclair reviewed personnel files with meticulous care. Her mission was clear: expose the network of corruption, starting with the most dangerous officers. She summoned Detective Kendra Ellis, an officer whose integrity had often been marginalized, to collaborate on an off-the-books internal audit. Laurel explained that every arrest report, every use-of-force incident, and every suspect encounter under Officer Vance Harland's watch needed to be cross-referenced with hospital admissions, business records, and financial transactions. Ellis understood the gravity of the assignment. The risks were enormous, but so was the potential for justice. Across the city, Harland's routine resumed as if nothing had changed. He patrolled streets and collected his regular bribes, still convinced that Chief Sinclair posed no real threat. He even forced Quinn to shut off his body camera during a visit to Reginald Tate's auto shop, oblivious to the fact that Laurel had secured a federal warrant allowing remote surveillance. Video and audio captured every extortion attempt, every intimidation tactic, and every illegal order he issued to his subordinates. Meanwhile, Laurel orchestrated her strategy with precise calculation. Every step was measured, designed to ensure that when the moment came, the corrupt officers would be exposed beyond denial. The Oakidge PD was about to be shaken to its core, and Harland, blinded by arrogance, remained entirely unaware of the invisible trap closing around him. Laurel and Ellis worked quietly, building a case so comprehensive it left no room for maneuver or excuses. As night fell over Oakidge, the city lights casting long shadows over the precinct, Sinclair allowed herself a brief moment to reflect. This was justice, deliberate and unavoidable, delivered with surgical precision. The corrupt would soon face the consequences of every abuse, every threat, and every act of cowardice that had poisoned the department for years. The balance of power had shifted. For Harland, the calm before the storm was already over. For Laurel Sinclair, the work to restore integrity was just beginning. The meticulous web of evidence and federal oversight meant that the reckoning could not be stopped, and the seeds of accountability were now firmly planted. The following days were a tense study in patience for Officer Vance Harland. Every radio crack, every shuffle of boots in the precinct set his nerves on edge. The bruising arrogance that had carried him through years of misconduct now left him jumpy and cautious. He avoided the top floors, kept interactions brief, and checked his surroundings compulsively, convinced that any movement could trigger retaliation from Chief Laurel Sinclair. Despite the pressure, Harland's arrogance began to resurface, convincing him that the chief was too preoccupied with city council committees to pursue a single minor assault. He laced up his boots for an evening patrol, feeling invincible once more, and strode into his cruiser with Rookie Quinn in the driver's seat. Their destination was Reginald Tate's auto shop, a site of repeated extortion masked under the guise of proactive policing. Quinn hesitated, aware that no official call justified the visit, but Harland's voice brooked no argument. They drove through the industrial district, sunset casting long shadows across the warehouses. Harland directed Quinn to park out of sight, then stepped into the garage, his presence overwhelming. Reginald Tate, a hard-working middle-aged man, recognized Harland immediately, tension stiffening his posture. Harland demanded proof of legitimate transactions, insinuating dire consequences for non-compliance. When Reginald explained financial constraints, Harland's temper flared, shoving the man against a truck and threatening him with arrest if payment wasn't forthcoming. The interaction, captured by hidden cameras and microphones orchestrated by Chief Sinclair and Detective Ellis, recorded every word and every abusive act. Harland returned to the cruiser, convinced he had restored control, unaware that federal surveillance had made him the subject of an airtight case. Inside the garage office, Ellis reviewed the video feeds with a technician from the FBI, ensuring evidence was securely encrypted and untouchable by local interference. Laurel Sinclair, in her office, monitored the operation, her strategic patience unwavering. The goal wasn't immediate confrontation, it was a complete dismantling of Harland's network. As dusk gave way to night, the city appeared calm, but behind the scenes the foundations of the corrupt system were cracking. Harland, oblivious to the surveillance, reveled in a false sense of invincibility, setting the stage for a reckoning that would bring every abuse to light and restore integrity to Oakidge Police Department. Morning arrived over Oakidge with deceptive calm. Officer Vance Harland strutted into the precinct, coffee in hand, believing the previous night's extortion had cemented his power. He greeted colleagues with exaggerated ease, oblivious to the tension creeping through the administrative staff. The intercom crackled to life, not with the usual dispatch, but the authoritative voice of Detective Kendra Ellis summoning him and Rookie Quinn to Interrogation Room A. Harland assumed a routine debrief and motioned for Quinn to lead the way, still confident in his untouchable status. As they approached the room, Captain Garrett Vaughan's uneasy demeanor hinted at the unusual nature of the summons. Inside the room was stark and deliberately intimidating. Chief Laurel Sinclair stood with Detective Ellis and Special Agent Donovan Pierce of the FBI Public Corruption Task Force. Harland's bravado faltered as he recognized the federal presence, his chest tightening with unease. Sinclair's calm intensity left no room for negotiation, every movement calculated and measured. Ellis displayed the footage from Reginald Tate's garage, revealing indisputable evidence of Harland's extortion, threats, and coercion. Harland's protestations about legality fell flat in the face of a Title III federal wiretap warrant, authorized and fully compliant. Vaughan's attempt to intervene faltered as Pierce confirmed federal authority overrode local protocols. Laurel's voice, measured yet merciless, recounted Harland's assault on her at the courthouse, highlighting his delusion of impunity. Harland's face drained of color, his mind racing, realizing that the tiny act of arrogance had set in motion his ultimate undoing. Quinn, now aware of the magnitude of the investigation, was offered protection in exchange for complete cooperation, and he immediately agreed to testify, exposing the full extent of misconduct. The room's silence pressed in on Harland as he understood the full scope. His career, freedom, and future were completely compromised. Laurel's strategy had worked flawlessly. The predator now faced the law with no shields and no allies. Harland's ego, once untouchable, shattered in the cold light of accountability, and the federal agents prepared to enact justice. Harland's mind raced as he was forcibly confronted with the full scale of his crimes. Chief Laurel Sinclair stepped forward, her presence imposing, and reminded him of the courthouse incident where he had assaulted her, shattering his sense of invulnerability. Every coercive act, every instance of intimidation and corruption was now documented, leaving Harland powerless. Captain Vaughan, once a protector and co-conspirator, was handcuffed and read his rights alongside him. The federal agents moved with precise authority, leaving no room for manipulation. Harland realized the protective shield of the police union and his badge had evaporated. He was alone. Laurel and Detective Ellis orchestrated the entire operation with flawless strategy. Officer Quinn, cooperative and visibly shaken, would testify about every illegal act, ensuring the case against Harland and Vaughan was airtight. Harland's arrogance crumbled under the weight of inevitable accountability. He handed over his service weapon and badge, his hands shaking, understanding for the first time the consequences of years of abuse of power. The precinct, once a domain of unchecked corruption, now stood as a testament to the meticulous and patient application of justice. The humiliating reality that a single misjudgment, the kick to Laurel Sinclair in the courthouse, had triggered the collapse of his empire was undeniable. Harland was led away by federal authorities, the echoes of his career's demise following him down the hall. Justice had arrived not as chaos, but as an unstoppable, precise force. Laurel's quiet reflection on her own bruised shin served as a reminder that reform often requires strategic patience, courage, and the resolve to dismantle systems of corruption from the top down. Oakidge would never again tolerate the tyranny of officers like Vance Harland. The trial of Vance Harland was a stark, cold reminder of the consequences of unchecked power. The federal courtroom, imposing with its high ceilings and polished wood, contrasted sharply with the cramped county courthouse where Harland once exerted his dominance. Harland, dressed in a standard orange federal jumpsuit, looked small and vulnerable without his badge, gun, or union backing. Assistant United States Attorney Serena Blake methodically presented the evidence: 4K video footage of Harland's extortion, testimony from Reginald Tate, and detailed accounts from Officer Quinn and other witnesses. Every act of intimidation, every threat, every coercive move was laid bare. Harland's attempts to dismiss the evidence as illegally obtained fell flat, his protests drowned out by airtight federal warrants. Captain Vaughan's cooperation sealed the case. Financial ledgers revealed the organized, systematic extortion Harland had orchestrated. As Judge Maxwell Thorpe spoke, the courtroom was silent, the weight of accountability filling the space. Thorpe condemned Harland's abuse of power, emphasizing the betrayal of public trust. The federal sentence included years of incarceration and the stripping of his municipal pension, with restitution mandated for victims like Tate. Harland sat, stunned, as the gavel struck, realizing that his arrogance and cruelty had finally caught up with him. Laurel Sinclair observed from the gallery, her expression calm, the courthouse hallway incident having triggered a cascade of justice. The oppressive culture that had protected predators like Harland was dismantled, and the department faced a new era of integrity. Oakidge had witnessed the fall of a man who believed he was untouchable, and a new standard of leadership had been firmly established under Chief Sinclair's unwavering guidance. Back at the Oakidge precinct, Chief Laurel Sinclair addressed the remaining officers in the main assembly room, signaling the end of the old culture of impunity. She emphasized that public service, integrity, and accountability were now the foundation of the department. Captain Kendra Ellis was promoted to lead the newly restructured Internal Affairs Division, serving as a visible example that honesty and diligence were rewarded. Officers who had lived under fear and silence began to see a path forward, cautiously optimistic about the future. The oppressive atmosphere that had allowed predators like Harland to thrive was replaced by a sense of order and ethical responsibility. Even rookie officers, once intimidated by the pervasive culture of corruption, now felt empowered to perform their duties without compromise. Laurel's careful, patient strategy had restored faith in law enforcement, not through theatrics or vengeance, but through meticulous planning and unwavering dedication to justice. Oakidge would now operate under a new standard, where misconduct was met with accountability and transparency, and where the public could trust those sworn to protect them. The officers absorbed the gravity of the transformation, realizing that the era of fear and unchecked authority had ended, and a new chapter of ethical policing had begun under Chief Sinclair's watchful guidance. Later that afternoon, Chief Laurel Sinclair walked through the Monroe County Courthouse, revisiting the long hallway where the pivotal incident had occurred. The space was still filled with public defenders, families, and citizens, but the atmosphere had shifted. Officers now moved with professionalism, and civilians no longer feared arbitrary intimidation. Sinclair observed a young officer navigate around a civilian seated on a bench with a polite, respectful, and professional acknowledgement. "Excuse me, sir, have a good afternoon." There was no aggression, no abuse of authority, just courtesy. Laurel held her leather portfolio close, recognizing the significance of this seemingly small interaction. It symbolized a systemic change, a culture restored to accountability and respect. Justice in Oakidge was no longer a fragile promise, but a lived reality. The fall of Vance Harland was a testament to the effectiveness of strategy, patience, and unwavering commitment to ethical leadership. Officers now understood that absolute power was not a tool to be wielded for personal gain, but a responsibility bound by law and morality. The corridors echoed with a new tone: professionalism, respect, and accountability, proving that transformative leadership could eradicate entrenched corruption. Chief Sinclair's measured approach had reshaped the department, demonstrating that deliberate, informed action could overcome years of institutionalized misconduct. Oakidge had been cleansed of its corrupt undercurrent, and the community could begin to trust the law again. The shadow of past abuses lingered only as a reminder of the vigilance required to maintain justice. Sinclair's presence ensured that the mistakes of the past would not repeat themselves. Officers adjusted their behavior, civilians regained confidence, and the precinct operated with renewed purpose. The change was visible, tangible, and irreversible. A new era had begun. The lessons from Vance Harland's downfall reverberated throughout Oakidge. Officers, once silent bystanders to misconduct, began to re-evaluate their actions and responsibilities. The department's training and protocols were overhauled under Chief Laurel Sinclair's supervision, focusing on ethics, community engagement, and transparent law enforcement practices. Rookie officers, now guided by the example of accountability, were emboldened to act with integrity, knowing that ethical behavior was not only expected, but supported. Sinclair worked closely with Captain Kendra Ellis to monitor ongoing investigations, ensuring that any sign of corruption or abuse was addressed immediately and decisively. The city's trust, once fractured, slowly began to heal as citizens witnessed fair treatment, lawful enforcement, and a visible commitment to justice. Oakidge's streets, once marked by fear of arbitrary authority, now reflected order, accountability, and respect. Chief Sinclair's strategic patience had dismantled a corrupt system without chaos, replacing it with a culture of responsibility that permeated every level of the department. Officers learned that oversight was real, that power was a responsibility, and that abuse would meet certain consequences. The precinct, once a hub of intimidation and silence, became a center for integrity, demonstrating the long-term impact of decisive ethical leadership. Oakidge was no longer a playground for those who believed themselves untouchable. It was a community protected by law, transparency, and accountable authority. The transformation was profound, with each officer understanding the weight of their actions and the enduring consequences of misconduct. Justice, carefully applied, had reshaped the department's DNA. As weeks passed, Oakidge began to feel the tangible effects of the reform led by Chief Laurel Sinclair. Officers who had once thrived under fear and favoritism now faced a system where merit and accountability were paramount. Training sessions emphasized ethical policing, the protection of civil rights, and proper community engagement. The department implemented a rigorous review process for all use-of-force reports, arrests, and internal complaints, ensuring that no misconduct could be hidden. Detectives like Kendra Ellis, now promoted and empowered, led by example, showing that dedication and integrity were rewarded. The public, once skeptical and wary, began reporting more incidents, confident that their complaints would be addressed without retaliation. Officers adapted to the new reality. Some struggled with the shift, while others embraced it, realizing that transparency and accountability were not threats, but tools to rebuild trust. Sinclair continued her oversight with meticulous attention, ensuring that corruption could not regrow in the cracks of old practices. Oakidge's streets slowly became safer, not only because of law enforcement, but because citizens felt the system worked for them, not against them. Harland's absence loomed as a cautionary tale, a reminder that abuse of authority carried severe consequences. The department's culture had been fundamentally changed, and the ripple effects were visible in every precinct interaction, every arrest, and every community engagement effort. Integrity had replaced intimidation, professionalism replaced fear, and justice became a consistent, reliable presence. Oakidge was no longer defined by the corruption that once tainted it, but by the renewed commitment of its leaders and officers to serve with honor and accountability. Months after the initial overhaul, Oakidge Police Department operated with a renewed sense of purpose. Officers adjusted to the expectation that every action would be scrutinized and accountability was enforced consistently. Public trust grew as citizens saw fair treatment and professional conduct in daily interactions. Sinclair continued to mentor her leadership team, emphasizing that long-term reform required constant vigilance. Internal audits and federal collaborations ensured that any hint of misconduct was identified and addressed promptly. Officers like Kendra Ellis, now in a commanding role, guided investigations with integrity, inspiring younger officers to follow suit. The culture of fear that had allowed Vance Harland and his accomplices to dominate was dismantled, replaced by transparency, collaboration, and mutual respect. Citizens felt safer, and the department's morale improved as ethical conduct was rewarded and corruption punished. Oakidge had transitioned from a city controlled by rogue power to one governed by law and principle. The transformation was visible in the precincts, in the streets, and in the confidence of the community, proving that deliberate, sustained leadership could successfully restore justice and integrity to a compromised institution. The systemic reform under Chief Laurel Sinclair had matured into a resilient culture of accountability. Officers adapted to a new normal where integrity dictated actions and misconduct had immediate consequences. Daily briefings emphasized transparency, community respect, and adherence to the law, reinforcing the department's renewed values. Public engagement increased, with citizens reporting incidents and receiving timely responses without fear of retaliation. Kendra Ellis and her team ensured that internal audits were thorough, targeting any deviation from ethical standards. The precinct atmosphere shifted from tense and oppressive to one of professional focus, collaboration, and mutual respect. Officers who had once relied on fear to command obedience were replaced or retrained. The community began to view the police as allies rather than adversaries. Oakidge became a model for ethical policing, demonstrating that meticulous leadership, strategic oversight, and patient enforcement of justice could transform a corrupted institution. The lessons from Harland's downfall remained vivid reminders. Abuse of power leads to accountability, and integrity is the foundation of lasting authority. Under Chief Sinclair's guidance, Oakidge PD had evolved into a department that protected its citizens, upheld the law, and inspired confidence, proving that true leadership requires both courage and relentless dedication to justice. By the time the new policies had fully taken effect, Oakidge PD had undergone a transformation evident in every corner of the department. Officers approached each assignment with professionalism and respect for the law. Mistakes were met with coaching and accountability, not fear and reprisal. Community relations improved as citizens observed genuine fairness and ethical conduct. Chief Laurel Sinclair maintained close oversight, ensuring that the department's culture of integrity remained intact. Every officer understood that misconduct, favoritism, or abuse of power would result in consequences, reinforcing the permanence of reform. The city, once marred by fear and corruption, now thrived under transparent law enforcement. The lessons of Vance Harland's downfall became an enduring narrative of justice, demonstrating that systemic change required deliberate planning, strategic patience, and unwavering commitment. Oakidge had rebuilt not only its police department, but also its citizens' trust, establishing a foundation of ethical law enforcement for the future. Under Chief Sinclair's guidance, the department had become a model of integrity, demonstrating that leadership with vision, courage, and determination could eradicate entrenched corruption and instill lasting change in a community. The culmination of Chief Laurel Sinclair's work was both subtle and profound. Oakidge Police Department operated under a transparent, ethical standard, with officers held accountable for every decision and action. Public trust, once fractured, was restored as citizens witnessed fairness and professionalism in every interaction. Kendra Ellis, now Captain of Internal Affairs, exemplified integrity, mentoring officers to uphold the department's values. Corrupt elements had been purged, and systemic reform ensured that future misconduct would be swiftly addressed. The memory of Vance Harland served as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one, regardless of rank or reputation, was above the law. Oakidge thrived under the new leadership, demonstrating the lasting impact of strategic, patient, and courageous reform. Justice had been realized through careful planning, unwavering commitment, and meticulous execution. The city's streets reflected the shift. Order, respect, and ethical policing now defined the Oakidge Police Department. Chief Sinclair had not only enforced accountability, but had reshaped the culture permanently. Officers moved through the precinct with confidence, tempered by responsibility. Citizens engaged with law enforcement openly, knowing they were protected and heard. The fall of Harland marked a turning point, proving that arrogance is fragile and true authority is rooted in justice. Oakidge had reclaimed integrity, trust, and lawfulness as permanent fixtures. As Chief Sinclair stood in the assembly room, she addressed the department one final time. "Today, we have closed a dark chapter in our history. We are no longer an occupying force, we are public servants. Captain Kendra Ellis will lead the Internal Affairs Division. Officers, uphold this standard. Serve with honor and let integrity guide your every action. Justice is not a word, it is our daily practice. The officers responded with genuine applause, a sign that fear had been replaced by respect. The precinct and the city it served had been transformed. Laurel Sinclair turned, briefed and collected, and left the room, her legacy set in motion. The impact of ethical leadership would ripple through Oakidge for generations. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.